This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform. More on them later. I don't want to be put on any watch lists, but it seems to me like we're all kind of agreeing healthcare CEOs are bad, not good. Certainly part of this is because the US healthcare system is by and large agreed to be a failure, both domestically and internationally.
Don't worry, Marge. America's healthcare system is second only to Japan, Canada, Sweden, Great Britain, well, all of Europe. But you can thank your lucky stars we don't live in Paraguay.
Here's some stuff from a Gallup article that came out last year. Americans' positive rating of the quality of healthcare in the US is now at its lowest point in Gallup's trend dating back to 2001. The current 44% of US adults who say the quality of healthcare is excellent, 11%, or good, 33%, is down by a total of 10 percentage points since 2020, after steadily eroding each year. Between 2001 and 2020, majorities ranging from 52% to 62% rated US healthcare quality positively. Now, 54% say it is only fair, 38%, or poor, 16%. In addition to registering subpar ratings of the quality and coverage of healthcare in the US, few Americans, 19%, say they are satisfied with its cost. So, seems kind of bad. Even compared to other global north countries, which of course have their own issues with healthcare, sometimes quite similar, the US is, quote, in a class by itself in the underperformance of its healthcare sector. That's from a Commonwealth Fund article that came out last year as well. Here are some other choice quotes from that piece. The United States is not just an outlier on health system performance, it's an outlier on healthcare spending as well. Oh, we spend the most to get the least. Very good. The US and New Zealand trail peers for equity in healthcare access and experience. Americans face the most barriers to accessing and affording healthcare. Americans live the shortest lives and have the most avoidable deaths. So that's how our system is going. And often these conversations are also inclusive of like praise for Canada and the UK in comparison, especially Canada. We're always looking at Canada like, oh, they have healthcare and we don't, right? Or at least that's been the cultural conversation over the past many years.
They have universal healthcare. We just have Mr. Beast.
And indeed, we could have had a healthcare system like the NHS from the UK, which is a universalized healthcare system. We were actually quite close. After World War II, FDR, who was highly popular as a president at that time and created a huge sort of social welfare apparatus through the New Deal, also really wanted to have a universalized healthcare system. And then he died, and then his successor, Harry S. Truman, was met with a lot of difficulties in achieving that same task. There was that decline in progressive populism, now that FDR wasn't around, and also there was this huge rise in anti-communism, as well as a growth in the sector of the medical profession. You had all these doctors who were servicing capital. They were working for highly paid clients and thus were highly paid doctors themselves. And they created large organizations that lobbied against a universalization of healthcare. This is reporting from a Jacobin piece from 2014 by Adam Gaffney. Another choice quote from that: Truman had strong support from organized labor, but encountered trenchant resistance from organized medicine in the form of the American Medical Association. The AMA and other interests, including the relatively young pharmaceutical industry, poured millions of dollars into a red-baiting public relations campaign that all but accused the Truman administration of communist sympathies. The plan, unsurprisingly, soon went down in flames of Cold War politics. So that's how we didn't get universalized healthcare, or at least programs that have done better than the US's, like the NHS. Then again, if you know anything about UK politics or politics of these other global north countries, Australia, Canada, the Netherlands, there are constantly issues about privatization in those healthcare systems and withering away of those strong socialized healthcare programs. So even if we would have got it, it would have been a similar situation for us, where over the next 80 years, those systems would have withered away progressively. And depressing. I guess that's what leads to us having to have a deeper conversation, right? Because we can't settle anymore for merely saying we should just be more like Canada or the Netherlands, or saying, well, this is about greed and it's about immorality. It's because these healthcare CEOs are uniquely immoral people that are put in positions of power. not going to ask any questions about why people in positions of power are so immoral in the first place. Just get some better people in there, and that'll fix it. Those conversations are not adequate anymore. And I think we all can kind of agree on that, right? We can all kind of see that if money isn't a corrupting force, which I don't really think it is, I think it's something more, in that money is a part of a system that is in and of itself designed to be about power for a few people and no power for a lot of people who work for those few people. Do you know what I mean? It's about who has power over the healthcare system in the first place. It's about health capitalism. That's the term we're going to talk about today. And if you're not familiar with my channel or this side of YouTube, you might feel a little bit uncomfortable with the usage of a term like capitalism. I just want to say I get it. Before you write your angry comment, I understand that sometimes it is dispiriting. It's frustrating to be having conversations about why the world is the way that it is and trying to understand it a little bit deeper, and having people who go on Twitter a lot tell you, hey man, like, it's just capitalism. It's just capitalism. We just got to get rid of capitalism, abolish capitalism, and then all this stuff won't be bad anymore. It's not exactly fulfilling as an answer. But we should talk about capitalism, right? Because some of you might be supporters of capitalism. You might believe that capitalism is something that is good. It's the most natural succession of human economic history. It's the closest thing that works for human behavior that we've ever gotten in the history of economic systems. Or you might not be that extreme. You might not be Joe Rogan. You might be somebody who thinks capitalism has issues for sure, but at its root is still something that can be reformed into what we need it to be, because the good parts of it outweigh the bad or are important to salvage. You might just be like, I don't really know what capitalism is, in which case Wikipedia says it's an economic system based on the private ownership of the means of production and their operation for profit. So there's an uncontroversial definition of what capitalism is. You might be a person that thinks they're anti-capitalist, but isn't quite sure what that means. And you might think of capitalism as being something that works in certain instances and not in others. In all those cases, when it comes to the phrase health capitalism, it makes you uncomfortable, right? Those two words shouldn't be together. Health capitalism, that sounds like a bad thing. And it is. If capitalism is the economic system that means private ownership of means of production to gain a profit, if capitalism is about profiting as a system, you shouldn't profit off of healthcare. That's a bad thing. It's not good to profit off of cancer research. It's not good to profit off of putting people in hospitals. It's not good to profit off of giving people drugs. It's not good that the system on which we rely to survive, to have full lives, is determined by a bunch of people in a room wanting to extract as much profit from it as possible. So we're going to talk a bit about health capitalism today. And to do that, we're going to have to talk about a book called Health Communism. Why am I holding it like this? I'm holding it like it's a fish. Health Communism by Beatrice Adler-Bolton and Artie Vierkant, who have a podcast called Death Panel. That's pretty good. So we're going to talk about this book. And off the bat, the word communism, it might do some things to you in your head. It might make you feel uncomfortable, just as talking about capitalism might have. Oh, this dog won't shut up. I just want to say, if we can agree that health capitalism is bad, which we just did, right? Health capitalism shouldn't be a thing. What's the opposite of capitalism? It's communism, right? And definitionally, in terms of as a concept, communism is about the equal distribution of resources. Instead of things being concentrated into a small group of privately owned hands, they don't privately own it. I guess they privately own the hand. A small group of hands that privately own it, it's all of ours to own. It's socialized. It's across society. And there is no concept of profit necessary. And that should be how healthcare is, right? So I'm going to make an argument that's a little bit bigger than that. I'm going to say that you can't really have capitalism and not have health capitalism. And that's, the result that we get. But regardless, I think that there's so much that you can gather from this book, even if you are not quite where I'm at with that. So I'm going to read a couple of small portions from the book that I underlined, things that I think are really worth reading, but the whole book is really worth reading. There are some parts that I feel some tentativeness about, or I have some questions about, but overall, I really have enjoyed reading it. I found a lot of insight from it. So as some of you, though probably not many of you know, I actually used to be a music journalist before I became a YouTuber or whatever this is, and I kind of miss writing about music. It was what I studied, it was what I really cared about and saw myself doing for a long period of time. I loved listening to music, talking about how it was made, theoretical aspects of it, and talking, of course, about the social and political context of it. So with Squarespace, I'm now getting the opportunity to start a music blog. Squarespace is a super useful all-in-one website platform that allows you to stand out online. Whether you're just starting out doing something or you want to add something to your growing brand, Squarespace makes it easy for you to make a website that looks sick, that helps you engage with your audience, and helps you even sell products or make different transactions. I also am interested in the Squarespace payments function, which is the easiest way to manage your payments in one place with Squarespace. Onboarding is super easy, it just takes a few clicks, and it gives your audience different ways to pay for your products, including with Klarna or with Apple Pay. And of course, Squarespace is known to have really cool, simple, easy to adjust visual design tools. I really like the different ideas I was able to play with. If you're interested in doing something like this, check out squarespace.com/ElliottSang for 10% off of your first purchase of a website or domain using the code ElliottSang. Thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Let's get back to it.
My taxes go to pay for the prisons and the poorhouses. The homeless must go there.
But some would rather die.
If they'd rather die, then they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population.
I'm going to talk first about the concept of surplus. So prior to this video, I made a video about homelessness, and that video is sort of the start of this series, which I'm branching off from that concept to talk about other major issues. One of the main reasons, as I talked about in that video, that people become homeless is that they get into significant healthcare debt. Healthcare has so many costs in the United States. If something catastrophic happens to you and you have to go to the emergency room and you have to pay a ton of money for it, you have to pay a ton of money for surgery, you have to pay a ton of money to treat a disease, that can turn into a huge amount of debt that ends up leaving you homeless. And so this is why I'm branching off to talk about healthcare now. And what we talked about in that video is the concept of the surplus. The homeless are in a class position in society in which they are the surplus because they're not part of the workforce. They are part of somebody outside the workforce, the groups outside of the workforce that are often just trying to get into that space. And honestly, capitalist society works that way. We are judged in terms of whether we can work or whether we can't work, and whether we have the opportunity to work. Everything is judged on that lens, which in and of itself is a problem, isn't it? So the first chapter of this book tackles the idea of the surplus, and the idea that, for instance, the worker is not a part, this is a quote, not a part of the surplus populations, yet faces constant threat of becoming certified as surplus. And later on in this book they write, a worker becoming disabled constitutively passed the boundary from worker to surplus. Their social value following disablement was effectively as good as dead. So you become part of this surplus population, the homeless, the disabled, the sick. And that means you can't work, and therefore you're not able to contribute to society. And therefore you're not given resources accordingly. And this book does a great job tackling, so many of the issues with the programs that we have in place to take care of these surplus populations. But one of the main things is that sector has been privatized as well, and that now the dynamic has changed. Whereas before, earlier on in the capitalist system, the worker who becomes the surplus is now as good as dead. Now there's something almost even worse to be, which is something that is equally or even more profitable to capitalists in these sectors of the economy, to the capitalist class as a whole, because now people can profit off of and monetize surplus populations more than ever. And a great example that they give, nursing homes. Nursing homes are for-profit entities. What the fuck? Health capitalism. It makes no sense. Nursing homes now are incentivized to have more patients and do so while having the least amount of overhead and thus the least amount expended to taking care of those people, to giving them the resources that they need in those nursing homes as possible. Makes no sense. It sucks. That the surplus population has become an essential component of capitalist society, with many industries built on the maintenance, supervision, surveillance, policing, data extraction, confinement, study, cure, measurement, treatment, extermination, housing, transportation, and care of the surplus. In this way, those discarded as non-valuable life are maintained as a source of extraction and profit for capital. So not only can you be like the person we read the story of in the homelessness video, somebody who suddenly develops rapidly onset severe bipolar disorder that renders you unable to work even though you are a well-established, well-respected worker in your field. And eventually that can leave you homeless. But there's also all these different things that are for-profit enterprises once you enter that state of being disabled and homeless that are meant to capitalize off of you. It stinks. And a lot of these systems are built with, there's just so much to get into, but a lot of these systems are built with this idea that some people are taking advantage of these systems and that they're not as sick or unable to work as they claim to be. This is from page 43. The pervasive myth of the malingerer, whose infectious dependency will bring about certain doom, is supported by the alleged eugenic/fiscal burden threatened if the surplus class were allowed to grow unchecked. We have this very common idea in society that we have to keep the surplus populations in check, reduce the programs that we have for them, make sure that they are as close to working as possible or as uninvested in as possible, unless they prove themselves deserving. There's a term that they use called biocertification. Are you certified as deserving biologically of care? And this screws over so many different people for so many reasons, often which can be racial, often which can be gendered, etc., etc. What's interesting is that they talk about this concept of the worker surplus binary, quote unquote, as being derived from England during the Black Plague. Quote, a labor shortage in the United Kingdom resulting from the mass casualties of the Black Death. The first statute of laborers, passed in 1349, was issued by Edward III's Parliament in response to fears of the growing leverage commanded by workers to demand better wages in a more favorable post-plague labor market. After years of plague, in which up to a third of the lower class of Britain died, a crisis of economic and labor power had arisen. In response, Parliament passed laws requiring workers to cede total control of their labor conditions to the ruling class and its state representatives. And the book bears out that this becomes extremely influential to European laws and policies and systems of organizing the surplus, the people who can't work. And that also includes the people from the UK who went over to what became the United States of America and the early colonies and how they sorted these things out. So a lot of this ideology that we have about what it means to be worthy of care and whether or not you are a valuable worker and thus a valuable contributor to society comes from the Black Death. It's not just antiquated, but it was always a problematic thing. It was always something that was about organizing people in a society to be subservient to the upper classes. And so much of our concepts of health, as they talk about in chapter 3, are based on the ideas that work is equivalent to health, that work is good for your health. A hard day's work is good for your health, and that everybody who is a part of the surplus is either some sort of malingerer who's trying to benefit off of the system, or somebody who just needs to work a little bit harder to get into the workforce, or somebody who is just hopeless and now we just, especially in today's context, can try to find different ways to make profit off of them otherwise. Some passages from page 57. The political economy demands that we maintain our health to make our labor power fully available, lest we be marked and doomed as surplus. The surplus is then turned into raw fuel to extract profits through rehabilitation, medicalization, and the financialization of health. This has not only justified organized state abandonment and enforced the poverty of the poor, sick, elderly, working class, and disabled, it has tied the fundamental idea of the safety and survival of humanity to exploitation. We've been told that work will heal us. We've been tricked into trying the work cure. We are told that work is in our best interest when the truth is that it only serves the need of capital and the ruling class at the expense of our health. Breaking the mirage of worker versus surplus provides a revolutionary opportunity to unite the surplus and worker classes in recognition of a better truth. Safety, survival, and care are best ensured outside of capitalism. On page 113, the authors delve into how these models, these understandings of the eugenic burden, the burden to society, are a great deal of why we have the insurance companies of today. The things that insure you in case you potentially could become one of those burdens to society, to prevent that from happening. That's where we have these concepts today of the pre-existing conditions. You can't receive coverage because you already have a sickness. You already have an ailment. What? That's why I want coverage. That's why I want health insurance, so that I can get care for things like my condition. The authors write, private health insurance companies operate on an explicit debt eugenic burden model. Their aim is to ensure as many biologically or behaviorally low-risk individuals as they can, from which they draw premiums as operating revenue, and as few high-risk individuals as possible to stem potential losses. Why? But the whole point of healthcare is that we take care of people who are the most at risk. That's how it should work. There's a lot in terms of the chapter called Border that delves into how these health insurance companies exported themselves essentially to countries, especially in Latin America, when globalization occurred in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. In order to obviously make a profit, they created this, this paper called Investing in Health. It was tied into these countries which suffered from poverty that incidentally were also because of colonialism, not being able to receive loans, not being able to receive funding from the World Bank, the US's big pile of money, unless they made some changes to their healthcare systems. That included the companies like Aetna and Cigna from the United States building footholds in countries like Argentina, Brazil, Chile. Again, under this debt eugenic burden model, right? World health spending, and thus also the potential for misallocation, waste, and inequitable distribution of resources is huge. Oh, are we spending too much money taking care of people for being sick? Oh, isn't that the whole fucking point of healthcare? Unbelievable. It's not like they were doing a good job of hiding their motives of wanting to profit off of sick people and wanting to profit off of not sick people who are desperately trying to avoid being sick so that they wouldn't be cast out from society. You have a passage like this on page 116. It's so hard doing this with you. I'm not doing physical books anymore because it's so hard fucking doing this. As early as 2001, research by Howard Waitskin and Celia Iriart demonstrates that healthcare and social security funds of developing countries had become a major new source of capital for US, European, and transnational insurance companies. The authors note that executives of corporations entering the Latin American managed care market report substantial rates of profit relative to investment, predict strong profit margins in the next several years, and expect high rates of return for investors. Waitskin and Iriart quote a managed care executive representing the Excel Group, a private investment company in Argentina, as saying, this is a banger of a quote, "It's a very lucrative market. The real opportunity here for an investor-owned company is to develop tools in the prepagas prepaid market in anticipation of the obras sociales social security market. As anticipation of this new market soared, one trade journal declared it a mañana pension bonanza." Health capitalism is not getting us anywhere. So if you're interested in healthcare and understanding why the system is so apparently broken, but really this is how it's supposed to work. It's supposed to kill people. It's supposed to ruin people's lives. Then you should check out that book. And if you're feeling doom and gloom, I totally understand. But I also think that the book has a lot to say about, in particular, a program that was achieved in Germany in the 70s and 80s called SPK, and studying how it was based on detaching ideas of health from capitalism and building a type of revolutionary dialectical relationship between patients and doctors. It was a patient-led community health program. And there are programs today. There are direct healthcare places today that aren't quite the same, but do work in a way that is better than health insurance does, or at least in a way that can lead to a much better direction and lead to some really great care for you. I urge you to take a look in your area to see if you have any direct healthcare places in your neighborhood nearby you. There are places in Michigan, one I'll put on screen right now that is a good example, and see how you can support these programs. In fact, here's a TikTok talking about it.
I'm Dr. Anna Myrer of Presence Primary Care, and I don't need to turn to vigilantism because I'm already doing my part to take down insurance company CEOs. I'm part of the direct primary care movement. We are bringing healthcare back to the doctor and the patient with zero unalivings. The concept is simple. Patients pay an affordable monthly fee and that covers the doctor's services. That's it. No copays, no hidden fees, and no shoveling your hard-earned cash into the bottomless gullet of corporation shareholders. And the best part is, insurance companies hate us. They need you to believe that they're helping you get healthcare better, faster, and cheaper. They're hoping you won't find out that they're the reason you get shorter and shorter doctor visits and can't see your own doctor when you're sick. Now that I'm out from under their thumb, I can have hour-long visits with my patients if I need to, and I can usually get them in same or next business day when they're sick. They don't want you to know that your $100 blood test could cost you $4 out of pocket when I order it. I can get you a year of generic blood pressure pills for less than $10, but don't tell the CEOs, they'll pee their pants just for the attention. They've been training you for a generation to think it's normal that you consent to buy healthcare services first and find out what it costs weeks or months later when you get a surprise bill you can't do jack shit about. I don't have a way around the need for insurance yet for emergencies like hospitalizations and surgeries, but we don't have to let primary care become an insurance company racket. And when you have quality primary care, you're less likely to have emergencies and need things like surgeries and hospitalizations. So send a hearty fuck you to insurance executives by joining a local direct primary care practice today. You'll be helping to undermine the predatory insurance system, getting great medical care, and avoiding a life of crime.
The last thing I'll say is, when it comes to healthcare CEOs, we kind of have realized that what they're doing is violence, right? I mean, what was done to them was also violence, and that was the thing that's being centered in all of the news articles and the headlines. But when people do this, when they profit off of taking advantage of people's concerns about health and taking advantage of the sick and disabled, what they're doing is a type of violence. There's a concept called social murder from Engels and his famous text from the 19th century about the working class in England. When one individual inflicts bodily injury upon another such that death results, we call the deed manslaughter. When the assailant knew in advance that the injury would be fatal, we call his deed murder. But when society places hundreds of proletarians in such a position that they inevitably meet a too early and an unnatural death, one which is quite as much a death by violence as that by the sword or bullet, when it deprives thousands of the necessaries of life, places them under conditions in which they cannot live, forces them, through the strong arm of the law, to remain in such conditions until that death ensues which is the inevitable consequence, knows that these thousands of victims must perish, and yet permits these conditions to remain, its deed is murder just as surely as the deed of the single individual, disguised malicious murder, murder against which none can defend himself, which does not seem what it is, because no man sees the murderer, because the death of the victim seems a natural one, since the offense is more one of omission than of commission. But murder it remains. Thanks for watching. Check out my Patreon where I post interviews with other content creators and cool people, as well as behind the scenes content, previews of upcoming videos, etc. And thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Have a good one.